All right, well, welcome to today's webinar, Setting the Foundation for a Successful Customer Academy, hosted by Northpass. I'm extremely excited to bring you three super qualified individuals to help educate you on the ins and outs of launching a great customer academy. And it's really funny, in the customer education Slack community, they were even described as customer education royalty. I tend to agree with that sentiment. That said, I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of color about who we are at Northpass. So Northpass is the provider of a leading LMS that helps today's forward-thinking businesses train their customers, partners, and employees. We work with some companies you may have heard of, such as Bamboo HR, Compass, Lyft, Shopify, Uber, and hundreds of others. We even recently just announced an all-new integration that connects our LMS into HubSpot CRM. So I guess you could say we're taking customer education pretty seriously. Learn more about it at northpass.com. Just some housekeeping. Feel free to use the chat functionality. In fact, we encourage it. If you have any burning questions, though, please use the Q&A function below. Our team will be, we'll be taking questions. We'll be doing a Q&A at the very end of today's discussion. So please just enter your questions in the Q&A function and we'll go from there. And all that said, Chris, please take it away.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Northpass, and thank you, the entire team who made today possible. The slide deck, all of the feedback that we've received, it's much appreciated to bring the three of us on. We're really excited to get started today. Welcome to all the attendees. I think I'm up to 6 countries. I saw a UK and an India location pop in. So awesome that we have a global community here today for this conversation and hopefully a very lively Q&A after the fact as well. So let's jump right into our agenda. Lindsay, Sarah, and myself will do quick intros, and then we're going to get right into the meat and potatoes around identifying goals, getting started with our resources, and then wrapping up with the importance of intimately understanding your learners. Then we'll do the Q&A, and we'll go over some additional resources. This is really the start of hopefully a great conversation, not the beginning and end. So let's jump in. My name is Chris LoDolce. I was fortunate enough in 2012 to be at HubSpot when we were starting the HubSpot Academy, working alongside Sarah Bedrick, Lindsay Thibeault, as well as Mark Killens, who's not here, and a host of other folks. Over the 8 years that I was at HubSpot working on the HubSpot Academy team, I had the opportunity to not just help start the team, but also scale and bring HubSpot Academy to really maturation, where now today it's in 6 different languages across the world, certifying hundreds of thousands of people every single year and training millions of people. Since leaving HubSpot towards the end of last year, myself, Lindsay, and Sarah, we've been focused on advising and consulting SaaS businesses that are customer-centric on how not to just build out their customer education, but how to think of an academy as something that's holistic, that impacts sales, marketing, services, your product team, even your internal training, and how to get the most value out of it. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to share a little bit about who she is, her background, and what she's up to.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with all of you today. My name is Sarah Bedrick. As Chris said, alongside Chris and Mark Killens, I helped found the HubSpot Academy team back in 2012. Over the 5 years I was there, I led our initial customer training program, and that transitioned then into leading our certifications program. Some of the larger initiatives that I led was the certifications program, which we grew over 10x in learners over 2.5 years, as well as helping to co-PM the homegrown LMS system, which is the Learning Center.
Great. Thanks, Chris and Sarah. Well said. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with a big global audience. My name is Lindsay Thibeault, and something that I like to always include in my story is before joining the HubSpot Academy team, I started as a HubSpot customer. And that really ignited my passion for customer education, because at the time, HubSpot Academy didn't exist when I was a customer. And I was really feeling the pain points that customers typically feel when they're missing this connect of education. So I was lucky enough to join the team in 2013, starting with building a whole lot of education and then transitioning into building out a content process that could scale for this growing global team. Towards the end, I did make a small pivot and transitioned into leading the customer training team, which was is an in-person training team, and even tried to tackle that through the pandemic over 2020. So happy to be here and looking forward to walking you through these 3 steps. I'll pass it back to Chris.
Thank you, Lindsay and Sarah. So let's get right into this. For those of you who are just joining now, maybe you missed just the beginning, a reminder, we have the chat throughout the conversation today. If you're just joining, we'd love to know where you are, what's the weather like, and are you just starting, planning, or maybe you already have an Academy live? Please share that in the chat pane. If you do have questions, please ask that in the Q&A portion of your Zoom. That way we can make sure to answer those questions either live at the end or follow up after the fact. All right, so let's jump right in. We're going to start with goals, identifying goals, and not just team goals. When we think of goals and really metrics from a high level, I like to think of that as the organizational's universal language. So what does this mean? Your executives, your department leaders, VPs, directors, and your individual team members and teams are all solving probably similar or close to the same problems, but you're thinking about it differently. You're using different language. The way in which you make decisions is different. So as a leader of an Academy program, it's important that you're really thinking about these 3 unique buckets: your business goals, your department goals and metrics, and then specifically your team goals and metrics. So let's dig into business goals to start. When it comes to your business goals, the most important thing for all of us here today, and really anybody leading a team, but specific to academies, is to intimately understand your business model. Not just the goals, but the business model. So I'd love in the chat pane if people could share out, what is your business model? Do you have a SaaS business model? Are you a product? Are you specifically focused on bringing a product to consumers, to other businesses? If anybody'd like to share, would love to see in the chat pane what that is. But the first note, if you're taking notes, is take the time to understand that. If you're at a company that shares that openly, awesome. If not, take the time to figure out a way, talking to leaders around the organization, to understand what are the metrics that drive your business? What are the metrics that your executives, the board, potentially investors, are using to make strategic decisions and investments in your business? We need to know this. Again, not directly related to the work that you're doing, but important for you as a leader. I see SaaS B2B here. I see a hardware product B2C using OKRs for metrics. So things are coming in, keep sharing. It's great to all see what we're doing. Another SaaS product here as well. Awesome. So now our department goals. This is where it gets tricky for us as leaders of Academy programs. Typically, we start embedded within one department. That might be customer success, that might be marketing. But for the educational content that you're developing, most likely it's going to impact not just the team or department you're embedded in, but it's going to impact marketing, sales, product, potentially even your internal training folks. So it's really important to take the time to not just understand the metrics that your VPs, directors, and leaders of these departments are using to make their strategic decisions and their recommendations on investment, but to track and understand those, if possible, in real time. Having a pulse on your department goals and metrics is key to the long-term success and growth of your academy. Now, lastly, but certainly not least, are your team goals. So when we think about our team goals, we think about things like goals around users or engagement or completion rates. And this is where things get a little tricky, or there's a little minutia to it. And what I mean by that is your business goals and your department goals are very clear, high level. People own those and they're focused on driving those metrics or hitting those key performance indicators. When it comes to the team, the most important thing is not to have your team focused on the results of their work and how that relates to department and business goals. The most important thing to do is focus your team on the impact that they can have on the learners and the learners' goals, which most likely are using your product or using your software to see value. Your job as the leader of the academy team is to put the right goals and metrics in place to have your team completely focused on how they're going to help the users and the learners succeed. The other part of your job, while your team is doing that, is to now then begin to start connecting your department goals and metrics and the business goals to the results, the impact that your team is having on the learners. So let's get to story time. 2012, Sarah, myself, Mark Killens, Lindsay comes on, Nick Sal, who's here today, and a few other people in this picture, Rachel and Kyle and Alan. We're working on this academy, but it was a 3.0. There were 2 iterations of a scalable training program, a HubSpot Academy at HubSpot, that really failed to launch. And from my vantage point, one of the biggest reasons was not the people. The people who started those 2 programs, Sarah being one who was in the second, have gone on to run full departments at HubSpot, start businesses, take businesses public. It wasn't a lack of knowledge, expertise. Really what it came down to was the team was focused on the department goals, driving product usage, was focused on the goals around the business, retention, customer satisfaction. The issue with that is that when your team wakes up every day and says to themselves, my goal is to get people to use more of the product, your curriculum and what you're teaching and how you teach it is going to look vastly different than if your team wakes up every day and says, my goal is to take the people who are committing their time to learn to be more successful. There's a myriad of reasons what that might be, job promotion, helping their business grow, more money, whatever that is. Waking up and saying, we are creating educational content. We are creating a learning experience to inspire and to get people to take action. That is the key when it comes to thinking through how you can start an academy team or grow an academy team and produce quality content that has the results the business wants, but at the same time, the impact that the learners need to continue to come back and learn and grow. So really to sum that up, think about focusing your team on your team metrics and goals, not the business goals and the departmental metrics. Now that's a fun little story of kind of where we started and how things really got off to a great start. We had feedback from across the organization on how people were really benefiting from the educational content that was there. But something that we didn't do so well was translate the impact that we were having to the results of the organization. And that's why we're talking about this today. Fast forward 10 years later, HubSpot's doing this incredibly well. And many of the organizations that Sarah, Lindsay, and myself have spoken to are starting to do this or are already doing this. Most of you probably have an LMS today. If you do, most likely you have a way, and you certainly should have a way, to connect the learner data to the goals of your department and your business. If not, it's going to be very difficult for your leadership team to make strategic decisions and investments on the academy, because the language that you're speaking does not align with the language they're speaking when it comes to metrics. So to wrap up here, I'm just going to go through one example of how this should work within your organization. Take this example as you're the leader of the team. You're the leader of the academy team, and your team's focused and doing a great job of saying, how can we drive engagement? How can we increase the completion rates where it makes sense? Are our learners enjoying the education, and are they inspired to take action? Are those learners continuing to engage with our education over time? All of those things can be wrapped up in one metric, could be wrapped up into product usage. Right? We see through the data that customers or learners that are engaged tend to use more of the product. Customers who complete courses tend to use more of the product. It's your job, not your team's job, to communicate those metrics, that data, back to your department leaders. We want to arm them with that and keep that coming to them on as regular as a basis as possible. Here's why. We're in July. 2022 planning is probably starting for a lot of businesses. If it hasn't started, it's starting in the next few months, most likely. So let's fast forward. Your department leads, those people that you're sharing this data with, are in a meeting with the executive team. And the executive team says, 2022, we need to improve retention. What are those levers that we can pull to improve retention? product usage is going to come up. Somebody's going to say, well, looking at the data we see, there's a correlation, or product usage influences the retention rate. People are using more of the product, tend to retain at a higher rate. If you've armed your department leads with this data around how your team is driving results for the business, when the executives ask, well, what do we do to improve product usage? They have a clear way to communicate how the Academy program that you're running does that. If you need some data, there's tons of research out there. Forrester, many other research studies that have been published that show how educational content influences product usage, which influences retention. So that data is there, but it's your job to create that story and connect the dots between these three different levels of your organization and the metrics that they use. Now, this takes some time. It takes continual work for you as the leader of the Academy team. The tricky part is, while it might be difficult for you to do, the most difficult task for your team is to actually create educational content that's inspiring, that drives action, that's educational, and doesn't take 5 years to develop one course. So I'm going to pass it over to Sarah now, who's going to go into a little bit more detail on how specifically you can go about creating this educational content and not spend years just getting one course live.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Chris. I just want to say, when Chris, Lindsay, and I were coming together to think about the content we wanted to present here, one of the things that popped up was the metrics conversation, and how that it took us a while to figure out how to connect, as Chris said, connect our team, Academy team's metrics to the greater business and departmental metrics. And that, I feel like, would have accelerated our growth tremendously. And so it's a great pro tip for anyone who's getting started here. Oh, looks like I'm advancing. I'm advancing unintentionally here. Okay, great. So the section that I'm going to present is focused on getting started with the resources that you have available today. So there's a lot of people who were planning their academy or their customer education initiative. There's some people who are launching, and there's some people who already have it live. And so wherever you are in that stage, this is going to hopefully be really relevant for you. So before we get started, quick pulse check. Let me know in the chat window. Are you extremely happy and feel like you're fully resourced today? Do you feel like you have the money, the tech stack, you have the team members, everything you need to take your academy to where you want it to be? I love the first one that came in, bahaha. Yes, yes, and that's really normal. I just saw a study that came up from PlanHat. Most people feel under-resourced. And so this is hopefully going to be a really helpful section for everyone. And the reason that this is so important to talk about is because it's one of the most challenging things. I feel like it's a no-brainer. Get started with the resources available. But it's so challenging because it is so easy today to look around at all of these amazing academies and universities that businesses have built, and to set that as a benchmark for yourself, or to set your vision and attach it to that. And then when you look back at where you are today and the resources that you have available, it can be really deflating because you're focused on this big gap of where you are today and where you want to go. And when I look back at our time on the Academy, one thing that I think made us tremendously successful is that we didn't focus on the gap, we focused on the gains. And the way that we did that was by focusing on our progress instead of perfection. And what happens when you focus on progress instead of perfection is you give yourself the permission to start with where you are today. And when you give yourself that permission, you acknowledge that there's going to be obstacles in the way. You also embrace the ups and downs, and you even honor the journey of success and growth, and understanding it's not a straight line. It wasn't a straight line for us on the Academy team. Certainly riddled with loops and turns and lots of learnings. And I think that's where our true power came from. And I think if we were to start to build the Academy like the perfect version of what we thought the Academy was, and we had all the resources in the world, we would have made some really big bets that just missed the mark completely. One thing that we did when we focused on progress was focused on the consistent gains. these are the resources that we have today. How can we be as creative and as innovative as we can with this constraints to get to where the next level might be? So we got hyper creative. We didn't have so story time on this. Like when we got started, we had zero budget. Our team was an experimental team, and it was kind of like, here's a few people, here's 6 months to figure it out. Good luck, and no budget. And so we used the resources that the customer success team had. We didn't have budget for stock images. So here's a great example of myself on the right and Rachel, another professor, just kind of coming up with our own stock images, which a lot of people do now, which I applaud and celebrate tremendously, the creativity. And we also got really obsessed by like using our constraints to our advantage. Instead of being a disadvantage, we turned them into an advantage. We were like, what are the best stories we can tell for our training? What are the best statistics we can include? And we obsessed over how we could create the best training possible with our current constraints. So my recommendation would be, if you find yourself resource constrained, instead of looking at it as a disadvantage, look at it as an advantage. How can you create the best possible training with what you have available? So if you haven't already, take stock of what is true today. What do you have access to? What resources are available? And use that as your starting point. And continuously focus on the gains. Like, where were you? Maybe on a team meeting, ask your team, what's something that you're proud of in the last 90 days? What's something you're proud of? Focus their attention on the gain instead of the gap of like where you want to go. It's great to have that vision, but if you're constantly using that as your barometer of how you're performing, it's really deflating. Also, have a wish list. Don't use that as your benchmark, but if you do get resources, it's great to be able to pull from, your wish list. Okay, so with that said, that can be a great way to think about your current situation as an advantage. Something else I feel like is a great workaround for being resource constrained is to think about the other teams at your company and what resources you can borrow or trade with. So a little known fact is that when we got started, Chris, Mark, and I on the Academy team, all of our training was webinar based. And it was because that was just the constraints that we had, and it worked for a long time. However, after a bit, people stopped attending. The feedback that we got was that people couldn't attend the training at 2 p.m. and asked about other times. And I was leading our education initiative at the time. And so I proposed that we should turn everything into video-based training. And our manager at the time, Mark Killens, was like, no, bad idea. And I don't blame him for saying that. And he said no, because one, it wasn't proven out. We didn't know if that was actually a good idea or a bad idea. And two, we just didn't have the resources. And so what we agreed upon was we'd do a pilot. We would do 2 videos, and Lindsay and I ended up memorizing, we didn't have a teleprompter, we ended up memorizing like 3 to 5 pages of scripts. It was really challenging. I think that was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do, being on camera, memorize scripts without looking up to the right to access my memory. But the beauty of it was, the way that we were able to get that pilot was we borrowed resources from another department, the marketing department, and a specific team on the marketing department. They gave us access to working with a video intern for 2 weeks part-time. And we worked within that constraint, and it ended up being so rewarding for our learners that we ended up transitioning all of our content over to video within the next 2 months. So consider what resources that there might be at your company that you can use. And then lastly, another workaround, and maybe I shouldn't call this a workaround, but if you feel like you're resource constrained, there is so much potential for developing momentum and visibility that can get you more resources. And that is to be hyper communicative and tell everyone what you're doing, tell everyone how you're doing. So those metrics that Chris had mentioned, tell everyone what you're doing next, tell everyone what your vision is, and communicate regularly. I like to think of this as increasing your visibility and getting PES, which stands for political, environmental, and social. Our first webinar-based trainings everybody looked at our team as like, what's that zany team doing in the corner? And we communicated by printing out all of the upcoming webinars on a piece of paper, like 20 pieces of paper, and handed them out to all the customer success managers to let them know what the training schedule looked like. I felt a little weird doing it. I don't think Mark did. Chris, I don't know if you felt weird doing that. I felt a little outside my comfort zone, but it worked. So it's a great way to get social. Another one is to get political. When we finally got an executive sponsor, I leaned into that so much and reminded people regularly, like, there's an executive who has put this as a top goal for our business this year. And so I reminded them of that and found ways for us to work together to create win-win situations. How can we meet our goals while also meeting yours? And then get social. We also held certification nights for other team members at HubSpot to get certified, certification lunch and learns for other people to learn about what we were up to. And we were constantly doing things that weren't scalable and beating the drum so that people were always aware of at least what was going on. And that increased our team's visibility. With that increased visibility, we got more learners into our training. And with more learners, we were able to get more momentum, more traction, more metrics that we could pull from to get more resources. So the three things, just to wrap up here before I pass it over to Lindsay, constantly focus on the gain, not the gap. Focus on your progress over perfection. See if you can trade resources with another team, and then also get outside your comfort zone and just tell everyone what you're working on. With that, I will pass it over to Lindsay to talk about intimately understanding your learners.
Thanks, Sarah. That was so great. I appreciate everything that you were saying there. Looks like my slides are advancing as well, so let me see if I can move it back. There we go. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Again, so excited to be here. And thank you both, Chris and Sarah. I was taking down so many notes myself of some really great sound bites you had. I also want to thank everyone for putting in some of the commentary in the chat pane. And you can all see this, but I just want to make note of what Ted said, because this one resonated with me so much. Training teams are the ultimate hackers because we always need to solve problems we don't have the resources to solve. And I think that's a great way to summarize how we need to think about goals, how we need to think about resources. And now a little bit of what I'm going to provide is how to start to really intimately understand your learners and starting to think about a educational and content strategy that you can begin developing for your own academy. Learners were really the reason that I joined HubSpot Academy, but I think it was the real reason the team was so successful and why we enjoyed what we were doing, because we always felt like, to Chris's point of setting goals, we were making an impact. Any changes that we made and how we prioritized our resources was because we were listening to our learners and what they were going to need. And in learners, in this case, it might be your prospects, it might be your customers. For us, we started with our customers first. It is so key when you're trying to understand these learners. I really break it down into two pieces. I'm going to talk about the listening part first, but I break it up into two pieces. How you understand is to listen and to also guide your learners. So the listening piece is something that you need to build into your feedback loop consistently. When Sarah was mentioning that we pivoted from on-demand or on-time webinars to on-demand training, that was because our customers were giving us plenty of feedback. Or when we soon realized we really needed to spend the time to script out our videos, that was because our learners were explaining our videos are far too long and we needed to make them more concise. So why you're going to be listening to your learners is you want to be figuring out, what are they trying to achieve? What common questions do they have? Where are they acknowledging those knowledge gaps? And how do they like to learn? There's many different ways that you can build in this learning mechanism. Even in the early days for us, it was having a really solid relationship with those that were also in customer success, having them forward on emails that they were getting from their customers. You can also use NPS, you can use surveys. You can also get on the phone with customers yourself and start to really uncover what your learners are saying. And it's really important to not just listen to what they're saying, but why they are saying it. We often recommend building out learner profiles, really uncovering who they are. But I think at times, if you don't have one that has been developed, a good place to start, and what we leaned into at times, was this jobs to be done framework. This might look familiar to some of you. This is a framework that's been created by Clay Christensen. It's used quite often actually on the product side of things. But what I find to be the real beauty of this is it gets you into that learner mindset. It's so important to, again, if you're going to be making that impact and reaching for those goals, solving for the heart of this, which is making a big difference in your customers' careers and their lives. And so the jobs to be done framework, or a way to approach this, is almost like filling in the blanks of this statement. When, situation, I want to, motivation, so I can, outcome. The situation you could fill in with when I'm in a new role, when I'm a sales rep. It's not so much about the situation piece of this, it's really about this end component. What's the motivation for your learners and what is the actual outcome? I'll give two quick examples because I think these speak to the larger impact that this can really have. And it's not showing fully on my screen, so I'll try to, there we go, perfect. Always able to adjust with some technical glitches. So here's an example, right? If someone that has recently purchased your product, I know a few of you here are representing SaaS businesses, if they are a new employee that's looking to just get up to speed, ultimately the outcome isn't just about getting up to speed. That might be their motivation. The outcome is that they want success in a new job that they just got. Or let's say they're a sales rep and their motivation is, I just need to create more sales. We probably have all heard that quite often, right? It's much more than that. It's not just about creating sales. They want to see success in their existing role. And so it's a way to reframe how you're thinking about your learners. It's not just about thinking about that list of topics that you need to cover and know that this is going to reach so many of your customers. It's about what's going to go into that education and that training and what's going to make that impact. That impact leads to those goals, and that leads to even helping improve those business metrics. To this day, I still get daily outreach from HubSpot customers that have gone through training that I've created. And they're giving me outreach not because they enjoyed the training, but it's because of the impact that it's made. That for me feels so fulfilling. It feels so rewarding. But that was, for me and for our team, the goal all along. We wanted to be able to make an impact so that our customers were more successful. I think that's the beauty of education. So super key to listen to your customers. There's definitely different ways of doing this, but I think having some of these frameworks or statements is a way that you can start to get into that mindset. Let's flip over. Listen and guide. A big part of creating any educational content is going to make sure that you have a little bit of structuring in place. It's important that as they're learning, you're not forcing them to overthink what they're trying to consume. You also don't want them, as they're going through multiple layers of your education, them jump into something that they weren't expecting. It's your job to be guiding them. So right from the get, and I know Chris and Sarah can attest to this as well, it was set when Academy was starting, HubSpot Academy. We needed methodologies, we needed frameworks, we needed a structure and process, whether it was creating a webinar or as we began to scale that to what you know HubSpot Academy to be today. I'm going to mention one methodology that we used right from the get, but I'm curious if anyone here, if you want to use the chat pane further, sharing maybe some methodologies you use that are often used in education, or maybe it's something that you even created. Because what we really did is we balanced a little bit of both right from the get. We leaned into some of these methods and frameworks that already existed, that we knew worked really well for communication or content, and we could adapt it for education. In other ways, we kind of put our own spin and started to experiment. One of which, this was used right from the get. I see Addie model here, and glad that's brought up because Addie is something I'll also be mentioning. This is the golden circle. It's created by Simon Sinek, and it's the why, how, what method or framework that we used when teaching. I see Chris and Sarah nodding because, I mean, this was the bread and butter to our trainings. It really helped us give a framework for a customer to know exactly what to expect when they were going to be going through any sort of product training. They'd know why this product is important, how you're going to use this product, and what that should look like. And ultimately, what we found was key here. This framework, it helped us lead not solely for educating our customers, but helping them lead to the action component. And that's the real part where we started to see the magic happen. It wasn't just about customers feeling inspired by what they were listening to. It was them then taking it and seeing that transformation. That's what our ultimate goal was. And so with the framework, we started to modify that into our video trainings, and we continued to use it for other types and formats of training. But it was always something that a customer would know and what to expect when they were going to be educated through HubSpot Academy. Another piece of this is the Addie Framework. I know this was mentioned in the chat pane. So this isn't something that we created, same with the Golden Circle. This is a well-known instructional design method. And when we started out, we knew we had to have a process in place, especially when we were adjusting from webinar to on-demand trainings or an online base. We didn't have a name for it. We just kind of put some different steps in place. We knew that we needed to have a curriculum outline. We knew we needed to have some scripting. We knew we wanted to have some graphics involved. And of course, we wanted to make sure we had some sort of metrics analysis involved. Really starting to combine what we knew, but based off of what we were learning from our experiences and what was also well used in the industry, we started to combine the two and started to put a name to our process. So Addie stands for analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And then you have that revision built in throughout there. But this really helped us as we were a growing team. We went from 5 to then 10 to even 20 individuals on the team. It helped us build a repeatable process and one in which we knew internally what to expect. It helped us with our never settle mentality and made sure that we were always making improvements to our education. And I'm sure that's a challenge that a lot of you are facing. It's not solely about just creating education. It's also going to be about keeping it up to date. So this was a real method that worked quite well for us, because it too was centered back around the learner and helping us truly understand what they needed for us to design for them to be able to get the biggest impact from our product. All right, so last piece here, that regardless of the frameworks or methodologies or any part that you put in place, it's going to be key for you to have a content creation process. And this ties in how you're going to be resourceful. It's going to tie in how you're going to start to be setting those goals. But most importantly, I think what you need to be thinking about is that it solves for scale. You're going to start off with certain goals that you're going to ultimately see grow. When we were building out our content process, I didn't have in mind that this was eventually going to scale into 6 languages. But what we built was a foundation that had the flexibility to allow it to grow. You want to make sure it supports your goals and metrics, the now and the future. Where do you want to get to? It can be easily repeatable. Easily repeatable by those that are also going to be creating the content. You don't want to solve as a bottleneck and feel like you're holding all of this information. If it can be easily repeatable, it's going to lead to so many more people creating this empowering education. You also need to make sure that this process, it builds in revisions and reiterations. It will never be a set it and forget it. You need to start and then make adjustments along the way, especially as your programs begin to grow. And most importantly, it has to center around your learners' needs. If this process is not working and you're not seeing that feedback you're expecting from your learners, then make those adjustments. But always, always, I think with anything education first, it certainly needs to be customer first. And with that, I'm going to pass this back to Chris, who's going to help us start to wrap things up. I know there's been a lot of great questions in the chat pane. I'm sorry, Chris, if I'm jumping ahead. There we go. Perfect. I'll pass this back over to Chris, but please, if you have more questions, continue put that in the Q&A and also in the chat pane.
Thank you, Lindsay. I was trying to take notes as we went through here. There's some great questions in the chat pane. We'll try to pull those over to the Q&A session. But just in general, I know probably a lot of you are thinking and wanting to dig deeper on a lot of these things. We could have kept going on, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation. We can continue that conversation on LinkedIn. Feel free to send any of us messages. If any of you are in the customer education community, it's an open community. Send us a ping on LinkedIn. We can certainly invite you, but that's a great place to have this conversation continue on. We touched on a lot of themes around the types of people. We didn't get into details and the types of people that are going to be focused on a learner versus focused on the metrics. There's so much we can go into. But for today, as we wrap up, again, thinking about those goals and how they relate across different parts of your organization, those resources that are available to you. Sarah, I think, said it really well, that you want to start, you want to get going, and you want to learn, and you want to iterate. And that's where everything Lindsay shared around the frameworks and methodologies and how we want to think about developing content that can be updated, that then does align with the resources we have available, so that we can show not just impact to our learners, but results for our business. And really those themes continue to come through around this iterative process that we hope all of you can continue to work on, and keep your heads up and keep fighting and communicating for those resources, where we'll always be understaffed. But that doesn't mean together we can't find creative ways to grow our teams and to overall impact all of the learners that are out there. And in closing, before we go to QA, I think something that I know Sarah, Lindsay, and I hold very dear to ourselves when it comes to education is how powerful education that does inspire action can be. It is a responsibility for all of us as we think about this, especially as we are people working for businesses, many of which are for profit, that we are using education in a responsible way to focus first on our learners and second on our business. That is our responsibility as people who are going to trust us and trust potentially their careers or trust the success of their businesses. Make sure that you never lose sight of that, and your team never loses sight of how powerful and important education can be if used in the right ways. So thank you all for coming today. We're going to move into our Q&A session now. It looks like we have a couple here, and Richard's going to read through those, and then Sarah, Lindsay, and myself will hop in and answer those questions to the best of our abilities.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for that. I think the first one is just pretty much a little bit about housekeeping here and just about sharing the slides and the recording after the webinar. So we will be sharing the recording after the webinar. So stay tuned and keep an eye on your email inboxes, because you will definitely receive a communication from us. But yes, so I guess we'll start with the first question. Chris, Sarah, Lindsay, feel free to hop off mute and answer it. So So as a customer education marketer, I have two questions below. One, while building the content pipeline for an early academy, what should be the way to shortlist and validate the topics? And then the second part to that question is, in your experience over 3 iterations, what is the best way to build the content feedback loop?
I'm happy to jump in on the first one, just around the pipeline. I think Lindsay and Sarah could probably add some context as well. The thing that I think goes back to what was shared during the webinar is really taking the time to understand what the learners are looking for, and how they are going to truly benefit from what you're creating. The other part, if you're a SaaS business or you have forums, is to look at some more quantifiable data around the areas in which users who may not have self-identified they're the areas that they need help, but through the data that you have in your organization does highlight areas to focus on. The third piece to that, I would say, is around your business's goals. If you have a new product coming out, if you have a product that you see a small segment of your users are engaging with and seeing great results, you may say to yourself, well, we want to prioritize ways in which to educate the rest of our user base or our customers on how to get value from those different available products within your product suite. But really starting with, as Lindsay and Sarah communicated, really starting with that learner, being intimately connected with them. And then to the second point, I don't know, Sarah or Lindsay, if you want to jump in on how we built out those feedback loops, because they certainly changed over time. But that's a great two-part question, because you're thinking about how do we identify, but then also how do we get that feedback to make sure we're iterating.
Oh my gosh, yes. I was like, I can't wait to answer this. I know Lindsay probably feels the same way. So what was present for me in this question, what popped up was over the iterations when we first started and we did our webinar-based trainings, we were obsessed. I keep using this word because we were obsessed with getting feedback at the end of each of our webinars. So every class that we ran, we launched a poll and we asked them a series of questions like, what did you, I can't remember exactly, maybe Lindsay would, but we asked them something like, what did you like? What do you think we could do better? And we looked at that after every single class and made updates to our story to make points clearer, to add better stats or supporting resources. And then when we transitioned to video, we started including a little pop-up at the bottom of each video. And it was a product that HubSpot had built internally called Tally. But I think you can find other versions. Delightful is another version I think you can find online right now. But basically the pop-up at the end of the class would show up and it would say like, are you happy? A smiley face? Like, how do you feel about this class? Is it happy, sad, or meh? And then there was a section for them to add in their feedback. We, again, looked at every single one of those. We tracked it regularly. And we also responded to every single inquiry that came in. Every single time someone asked a question, we made sure we responded. And I think that's something that's very different that a lot of people don't do, is take the time to be so personalized with that. Real quick, and then lastly, one of my favorite tricks that we did, and I can't take credit for this, Rachel Goodman-Moore did when she built out the certifications program initially, was at the end of every certification exam, when someone passed, it said, there's one question that said, what's one thing you think we can do to improve the experience of the certification program? And that was gold. Like that, every year when we updated the certifications, we looked through that and identified trends and used that as our levers for improvement. So lots and lots of feedback.
Really cool. Great answer, Sarah. Thank you so much. And other questions. So proving customer education's value to a business is always tricky. How could you do that as a company that sells hardware products to end customers? We aim to reduce abandonment, increase retention, and ultimately make customers more successful.
I'll jump in here again to start, John. I think so I'd have some additional questions, which is how are you tracking the abandonment and increased usage or increased retention? Certainly with a hardware product, if that's connected to the internet in some way, shape, or form, there's software connected to the hardware product. It really comes down to being able to, I think, track that. If you're not able to track that, then it definitely goes to what Sarah and Lindsay just spoke to around getting that feedback. Being able to open those lines of communication, whether that's through a community, through surveys, through if you have account managers or people that are working directly with your customers, getting a pulse on that. As I shared when we started Academy, it was almost all qualitative. That qualitative feedback was coming through overall NPS surveys, but also from our account managers, our support team, the product team, etc. So I think it would really be first starting out and understanding where are those lines of communication opened, where can you open lines of communication, and begin focusing on the qualitative piece if today that quantitative piece on understanding your retention through usage is something that you cannot track. But certainly it will always be tricky, and it's taking the time to build those relationships with all the department heads, with the executives, and starting to tell that story. But certainly for those of you today who don't have access to a lot of data, that storytelling is going to be a key piece to filling the gap of the data until you can access or you can report on more quantitative metrics.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's spot on, because if we all remember when we had started, we didn't have access to any metrics. Like, we knew that things were working so well, but it was really difficult for us to prove that out with some of those metrics that were really driving the business. So in a sense, we got very creative. I mean, we relied very heavily on showcasing the feedback that we were getting for our trainings and pinpointing some of those key words that were being used, of like, this makes me more successful, or I'm using the product more, whatever it might be. But I did see John's response in the chat pane as well. And I think that's a great place that you're starting, John, by surveying your customers already, 1, 6, 12, 18 months, using that even to, as Chris said, tell that story of even a few customers. If you start to see that difference, use it as a case study as to the impact that your customer education is having.
I want to jump in here. I'm so sorry, because I feel like this is burning top of mind for me right now. Chris and Lindsay summed it up perfectly. And I think one thing I would also add on is, as Lindsay said, get creative. And it's like creative with how you look at the data. We couldn't get access to the data that we wanted originally, but we became investigators and like cut and spliced data in all different ways. And we ended up coming up with data that was really meaningful, and ended up being like candy for us. One data point, and I hope I'm stating this correctly, but it was like HubSpot Academy leads. So not customers, but people who signed up to learn through HubSpot Academy closed 5 times the rate of an ebook. So we were spending so many resources at HubSpot on the marketing team creating ebooks, but it turns out 1 Academy lead was equivalent to 5 ebooks. And that wasn't like a traditional stat, but something that we found and ended up being really accelerated our growth, because that's so profound. Thank you for letting me say that.
I think that was a tremendous data point. Thank you so much, Sarah, for adding that in. We certainly have some more questions here, but I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. But thank you so much, Chris, Lindsay, Sarah, for that wonderful question and answer session, but also this great webinar today. And just want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some newfound knowledge. That said, Chris, you don't mind advancing to the next slide, please? That said, I do want to point out we will have a follow-up email that will include a recording of today's call, as well as sharing you a link to this customer education ebook here. This 5-point checklist that we've developed, it's certainly another educational tool that we feel will help you in your effort to launch a successful customer academy. Additionally, feel free to learn more about Northpass at northpass.com. There's plenty of resources available for you. And also, frankly, if you want to see what your company's academy could look like, please let us know. Our team is ready and willing to, show you what that would look like, and a Northpass team member would certainly be happy to help you out. All that said, thank you so much for attending. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thanks for joining.